Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome back to our Happy Strong Family podcast. Today we have a very special guest, Sister Kulsoom Kazim. Sister Kulsoom Kazim is a life coach, counselor, global speaker, and author. She holds a bachelor's degree in psychology from York University. She also holds an Islamic degree from Mishkah University, and she served as the women's chaplain at University of Toronto, Mississauga. She's currently completing a program to become a doctor in traditional Islamic medicine. She's an Islamic studies instructor at I3 Institute and inspires to spread the message of Islam with the various projects she is involved with. So let's welcome Sister Kulsoom Kazim.
Yes, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Thank you so much for having me. How are you doing today?
Alhamdulillah, I'm doing great.
Good?
How are you?
Yeah, good. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
Yeah, alhamdulillah.
And I want to also mention your website,
Yes.
www.kulsoomkazim.com.
Yeah.
Sister Kulsoom, what's your website about? What do you have on here?
Yeah, so a lot of people ask me how they want to contact me. So they can contact me through my website, through Instagram, whatever is comfortable for them. But it's basically about the work that I do. So like coaching, counseling, speaking engagements, my book. So you can find that all on my website, inshallah.
Yeah, I actually have your book. I was gifted it.
Did you like it?
I really love it. I
Alhamdulillah.
haven't finished it yet, but
Yeah.
mashallah, what I really appreciate about it is how you can be authentic.
Yeah.
And I was just telling my husband, because he's like, what are you doing this
Yeah.
week on the
Yeah.
podcast? But it's like, I love how you mentioned being authentic to your values and to your boundaries and to everything, and fitting that into the way that your life is, your family, your friends, all your social circles, your relationships.
Yeah, and I think like we always forget that the first value that we always have is Islam.
Yes.
And so like really integrating everything you have within the Islamic values that you have and not the other way around.
Exactly.
Right? So,
Exactly.
Yeah, super, super important.
Yeah. That being said, one of the things we want to fit in and look at in the lens of Islam is feminism.
Yes.
So what is feminism? Tell us a bit about it.
So I'm super excited to talk about this. I feel that it's not talked about enough. So I'll just start off with Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu wa rasulillah, rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri, wa al-uqdam min lisani yafqahu qawli. So your question was, what is feminism? So there's many different ways that people kind of describe it, but the common way of understanding it from a feminist point of view is woman empowerment. You know, getting the equal rights that you have as a woman, stepping into society in your roles and all the things that you're doing. Just kind of in a nutshell, basically.
Yes, exactly. So woman empowerment, would you say it's woman equality as well?
Yeah, for
women
sure.
and men equality.
Yeah, woman equality, getting equal rights, equal human rights, equal rights as a woman, in all the different aspects.
So let's begin this mindfulness meditation.
Yeah. So when it comes to feminism as something that you've studied, like how has your experience been? What are some takeaways?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. My husband was telling me, you know, maybe you should talk about this. And when I was in university, I went to York University. I used to actually classify as a Muslim feminist, right? Why? Because I felt like I was really strongly aligned with Islam, but I was also really strongly aligned with, as you can see with the work that I do, with women, right? Like I wanted to make sure that I support women, and I felt the best way that you could do it is if you call yourself a Muslim feminist. And slowly after I started realizing that no, that's not really the answer. Feminism isn't the answer, and you can't put Islam on a spectrum like that, because they're two very, very different things. And you know, if you want to fight for the rights of women, it's great. You need to, right? I think that women are underprivileged these days. There are a lot of things that are happening. There's a lot of communities that are underprivileged, though. You need to do it in the guise of Islam. You need to do it in the realm of Islam. And so that's why I kind of shifted gears, and now I'm talking about why feminism is actually ruining families and ruining our youth and ruining our women, to be quite frank. Yeah.
How did that shift happen? Like when was it where you're like, no, because at some point you were gaining knowledge in feminist studies and then Islamic studies as well. So where did that happen?
I think it's I'm going to speak in general as well, because I see this is what people are lacking, is when they start studying Islam, they study, you know, like the Fiqh, they study all the things that they're supposed to do, but they don't actually understand that as a Muslim, it's only Allah that legislates. It's only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that can tell you what to do and what not to do. And so when I started defining what it means to be a Muslim and who really Allah is in my life, that's when I realized that, okay, you can't be a Muslim feminist. You can't be a secular Muslim. You can't be a liberal Muslim, right? They're two very strong contradictions, which I think is really important to highlight. And so I'm glad we're having this conversation today.
Yeah. I like how you're comparing feminism to liberalism or to secularism. How can we make that comparison? Like, why is it that you do that? Because a lot of people would say, oh, feminism is just something that's part of our society, in the same way that, I don't know, like you could say I'm a Muslim youth, for example. So I'm in that category. What's wrong with me being in the category of people who are supporting women?
So when you say that you are fighting for human rights, or you're fighting for equal rights, right? It's according to who? You have to ask that question, according to who? Being a youth is just a classification of, the age that you are. Feminism is not the same as being the age that you are, because you're trying to fight for something.
Right.
And when you're trying to fight for something, you have to ask yourself, according to who? And so just that definition of it right away, differentiates that, okay, well, if you're fighting for rights according to human, well, they're imperfect.
Yes.
Right. And if you're a Muslim, then Islam and Allah has the optimal knowledge. And so directly you have to shift that focus to Allah and Islam.
Yeah, in the same way that we follow like so many different ways of just existing through Islam. Like anything we celebrate is we do Islamic celebrations. I would say feminism, you can put that in the same category. Well, if you're working towards rights for women, who are you doing it according to? It's Allah. Because if you think about it in terms of feminism, it's its own category, and they're working, I think, feminism, which I have had a very similar experience with you, as I in university I was doing psychology and I had a minor studies in like basically I was thinking as well, I'm a Muslim feminist. And I won't forget, my last course I took was actually Islamophobia. And so imagine, it's like an actual on campus at UFT Scarborough, we have a course that's about Islamophobia and Muslim women. So I'm like, oh, this is great, like it's merging both of the things that I believe in. But I think after graduating and of course, like learning more about Islam, that actually it's not even just the fact that, because a lot of people will say, well, no, Islam right now, currently Muslim leaders are not giving the right. So we need to follow feminist leaders. What's your thoughts on that?
I actually want to comment on that, right? Because the sentiment of being a feminist isn't necessarily wrong, right? Like I work with women. So I absolutely love working with women. And I think we do need to have the rights that we need as a Muslim and as a woman advocated. And feminism, if you understand it, is a reaction to a lot of the injustices that women have faced along the years, whether it's through culture, whether it's through religious leaders, whether it's through misunderstanding of the deen, because Islam doesn't oppress you. Humans oppress you. And so when humans misrepresent Islam, of course, women are going to, get oppressed and have the injustice. And so as a reaction, then you have this strong force of women, because alhamdulillah, we are very strong. You have that strong force of women fighting back and saying, no, this is really wrong, which it is. But then what they're advocating for also ends up being wrong. So it's a very slippery slope. The sentiments are right, but what you're clinging on to get your rights, that's where it's wrong. So I want us to understand why feminism started. And I mean, there's different waves, of course, but if you speak to anyone that claims that they're a feminist, you'll understand there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of tragedy and trauma behind that, which we need to address as a community if we're going to talk about feminism and not dismiss it.
Exactly. Because where do people, and I feel like this is a place I turn to as well, where do people turn to when they go through difficulties in their own community? And it's like the feminist movement and the idea of just being a feminist is so great, because it's like, well, this is my group of women that I found, even though there's certain aspects of feminism which as Muslims we don't completely agree with. When I was doing the studies for the last the courses, like from the first course, it's not just women's studies, it's women and gender studies. And that's very like clear distinction, that it's not just going to be about women, it's that we're actually in the feminist movement, we're fighting for women's rights, we're fighting for the gender rights. And so it's like that's where it's very different, because you're not just thinking where are my rights as a Muslim woman, and then the question is, why are we even turning to feminism for our rights? I know a lot of people say, oh, you have all the rights that you need in Islam. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. It's a slippery slope, because I just want to go back to your point that when you start aligning with feminism and let's say you want equality, okay, in some things it might work, but you're actually getting into a slippery slope, because what happens, for example, on a ship? Do you save the woman first? Do you save the men first? What happens in a state of war? Do you, as a woman, leave your children? You know what I mean? So you're getting into a slippery slope if you're really trying to fight for equality in Islam. And sorry, what was your second question?
I cannot remember it, but I think that was really, I'm now that you said that, I'm thinking of the concept of equality, how like basically equality isn't, we don't have the concept of equality in Islam, right?
Absolutely.
That's very true. Like women and men have very different roles. They have a very different status in terms of what they produce in society and what they do in society.
Yeah, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, right? وَلَيْسَ الذَّكَرُ كَالْأُنثَى, which is the man is very different from the woman, which means in every aspect you have different roles, you know, whether it's personality, whether it's the way that you deal with issues, whether it's emotions, whether it's physical strength, whether it's anything, men and women are very different. It doesn't mean that one is better than the other. It just means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has provided us with the way that you're supposed to be according to your gender. Right? So when you start questioning that, when you start doubting that, that's when you're going to get into doubting your Islam and doubting Allah and his laws and everything. So yeah, for sure.
So in terms of like flourishing with feminism, how is it in the Muslim community that like there's been an impact through feminism and it hasn't been good? Like how's that?
I think in so many different aspects, because I grew up here. Did you grow up here as well?
Yes.
Yeah. So growing up here, you don't realize the liberal thoughts that you start kind of adopting and including in your Islam, right? And so naturally, as you're growing up as a youth, it starts impacting your relationships. How? Because in your relationships, you're not putting Allah first. You're putting the things that you're learning first and the way that you're supposed to be. And so now there's like this competition between men and women in relationships as a husband and wife. I'm not supposed to be like this, or I'm supposed to be like that, defining their roles that are not from Allah. So relationships are failing because of this idea of, you know, feminism and equality and all of these toxic things. It's also impacting your youth because when you have that like that really exciting nature and you want to do something for the ummah and you're not sure about what Islam is, then you're going to start advocating for feminism because it seems like it's the right thing, right? So definitely the lack of Islam in our homes is what is impacting the youth and women because they don't understand that it's Allah that comes first, not you know the things that you're being taught in society. So I really see the danger of it, which is why I think we really need to start talking about it more.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the places in feminism that I thought was so amazing is this concept of intersectionality, where there's so many different layers of why someone goes through issues. And what feminism does really well is that it helps anyone from any category outside being woman and being from a different culture. For example, you're Pakistani, you're Muslim, and you're a woman. You tie all those together and you can say, well, feminism is supporting me because of the fact that it's supporting Pakistani Muslim women and it's understanding me as a Pakistani and a Muslim. But I feel like a lot of times what happens is within the feminist movement, if we go back to the top and look at the main clear agenda, it's really to eradicate that difference between men and women, which, as you said, the ayah, subhanAllah, like it's saying no, accept the fact that there is that difference between men and women and that they're created for in different ways. And of course, there's nothing to say that like in Islam, you can't do things, men can't do things that women do, and women can't do things that men do. That's where gender roles, like we don't have those expectations of gender roles as Muslims, but there's to a certain extent, feminism is actually impacting our community. As you said, our relationships. Oh, I can completely see that. I think that's so true. Do you have like a concrete, because just for anyone who's listening, I feel like we're talking in big terms because we understand it, but do you have like a concrete example of how this can really impact someone in their personal life? Feminism at a core.
Yeah. So off the top of my head, I mean, I want to kind of go back to that understanding that when you're trying to obey Allah and you don't put Allah first and you don't actually understand that Allah has the optimal knowledge. I think even let's put aside feminism for a moment. If you're going through anxiety, depression, emotional kind of anything that you're going through, and you don't understand that Allah comes first and tragedy hits your life, you're gonna think that, oh, what's happening to me is really bad. Right? Why? Because Allah has that optimal knowledge. Anything that happens to you is good, whether it looks bad, whether it looks good. And so when you lack that understanding, now you're putting mankind as that legislator, as the top of the the decision making.
Mhm.
And what happens with human beings? We're very biased, we're very prejudiced, and if you have human beings making the law, they're always going to make mistakes. So at the end of the day, why would you put your marbles in a bowl of human beings, which are going to dictate what you're doing, which might be right, which might not be right, as opposed to Allah, who will always look out for you? So just to kind of have that understanding, and to think of concrete examples of how it could impact you is, I'm a mother. So my daughter is 2 years old. I always say I'm a new mother, but I'm like, she's 2 years old, so I'm not sure if I'm a new mother or not anymore.
Yeah.
But as a mother, you want to put your child first, right? You want to give back to the ummah. Like, I'm here in the podcast today. My child is with my mother-in-law. So you can do both things. But when it becomes a competition and you're saying, no, I have to, why? Because my husband can do it, or, men can do it. Something like that, when you get into that competition, that's when it starts impacting your relationship with your spouse, but also the relationship with your child.
Yeah.
Because you don't understand the roles that you have that Allah gave to you.
Exactly.
Right? Your obligation to Allah comes first,
Yeah.
then your obligation to your husband, then your obligation to your spouse. And if you want to do, and your children.
Yeah.
And if you want to do anything after that, that's great. But not understanding your obligation and not honoring it, thinking that it's a sign of weakness or lesser than, that's kind of, I would say, what impacts you. So that's a really practical example that I relate to.
Yeah,
for sure.
exactly.
Yeah.
The concept of obedience in Islam
Obedience.
to our Lord first and foremost,
Yeah.
and then to our spouse. And it's
Yeah.
like, even just saying that, I bet everyone's gonna be like, what? Obedience? How? But really understanding that actually, if you look at it from a feminist point of view, that would completely be eradicated. It's like, no, you and your spouse are equal. You're gonna do things equally, as in your decision making is just as equal as his.
Yeah.
That's what in the feminist movement you will learn. And of course, this is not to say that like at a greater level it's communicated, but I think if you really sit with the ideology and you go through the classes, and you realize that make sure you speak up and make sure you do what you want to in your relationships, and make sure things are going your way.
It's about you.
It's about you. Exactly. But then from a point of Islam, when you learn about it, it's that once you get married, your responsibility is to your spouse, and that responsibility it's huge, and you've taken that upon yourself because you understand him as your caretaker, right? And so that whole concept is not part of feminism, and it is in Islam. And to really like flourish, as we say, I think we follow that because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is allowed in a group one leader, right?
And also, understanding that you can obey Allah, you can do all these things, you can still fight for the rights of women. All we're saying is that you have to make sure those laws are coming from Allah, right? Even when you look at like the Western law system now, if you get a divorce, I had a client, actually, she was getting a divorce, and she was obviously oppressed, and then a lot happened to her, like her money was stolen, etc. And she couldn't get a divorce for 7 years. Right? 7 years in a system that says that they're fighting for the rights of women and giving women equal rights. So you can advocate, but Islam will always be perfect in the way that the laws are present, in the way that it represents the solutions. And so even within the law system and the system that advocates for the rights of women and equality for all, you can see the flaw.
What would, from an Islamic point of view, how would have that gone down, that divorce, if you don't mind me asking?
So, I mean, we'd really have to get into the law and everything. So I don't know if this is the right setting to get into all the details, because they're so intricate and there's so much. But all I know is that, Allah has the perfect laws in place for when you get a divorce, for if you need to get outside of divorce, if anything happens to you, there's a way to deal with it. There's, the right way to deal with it.
Quicker protection and
and Islam came to eradicate all the laws that were misrepresented against women and against orphans and against the poor and oppressed. And so Islam really honors the woman. Like, even when you look at a family law and you learn about how much wealth are you supposed to get after someone passes away, the inheritance laws, the woman actually has more times that she gets inheritance than the man. So for a feminist, there you go. The woman in Islam is actually valued and honored more, because Allah is the one that's honoring the woman, not a flawed, weak, man-made system.
Exactly.
For sure.
I think one thing in feminism that's really, I would say it's hard to kind of overcome, is that what you just said, feminists would not say that, oh no, you're wrong. They'd say that's accepted too. that the Muslim perspective is accepted as well. That you're right. Muslim women do get more, for example, in inheritance laws, and so now let's include that into our movement. That's a very interesting thing. How do you get through this?
So now
because we're very included. That's what I'm thinking. Like,
it's an inclusive kind of ideology, I would say, right? Well, when you step away from feminism, this whole idea of everyone can coexist, and not even coexistence, everyone has equal rights and everyone has to be kind of equal. Well, you get into a slippery slope again, because that means that if someone does anything wrong, then you have to accept them. If someone goes against Islam, then you have to accept them, right? You accept, you're kind to people, you accept people, you're tolerant of people. But the minute that they disobey Islam, you have to start advising them. And so even away from feminism, this idea of liberalism, again, it goes to that you are free to choose what you want. You get to decide what you want. You can wake up tomorrow and you can be an animal and that's okay. And obviously I don't need to speak on the many different flaws with that kind of thinking. And so just the ideology behind it of freedom of thinking and liberty and pursuit of happiness, again, it's not aligned with the values of Islam, because our freedom is from Allah. Right? So,
exactly. And our laws are from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And actually the fact is the leaders of the feminist movement are not Muslim. They're not actually Muslim. People who are like leading with Islam. So if we are saying that Islam is a way of life, feminism, I would say, is a way of life. And so that's where the issue is. You can't merge those two together.
So even let's say, okay, let's argue away from the non-Muslim feminists. Let's talk about the Muslim feminists. There's so many, right? Exactly. But again, you're putting Islam on a spectrum. What you're basically saying is that, okay, Islam is on one side and feminism is on one side. When really Islam fights for the rights of women, but it also fights for the rights of man and for the orphan and for the oppressed and for the poor and for every single person. So if you want to fight for the rights of women, do it. But do it within Islam, because Islam will give you the solutions. And so even the Muslim feminist, which I used to claim that I thought I wasn't, and even you kind of struggled with that, is you're going to get into a slippery slope, because you're going to start questioning the laws of Allah. And you can see it with, people outside that are arguing that I want to be the imam, or arguing that, no, we don't need to wear the hijab, or that we don't need to cover ourselves. And so it's, you're literally putting up a war against Islam and waging war against Allah by questioning his laws and obedience to him. So exactly, it's problematic.
Because feminism is known to be a lens as well. It's a way you see life through. So I remember learning that once, and I was like, whoa, like I never thought that like the feminist movement is actually saying this, that feminism is a lens you look at everything through. And imagine that's like every single aspect you actually look at it through feminism. That's how we studied it. And it's very intensive. It's like every single thing is looked through, for example, the way you can look through every single thing from physics, right? And it's not to say that as a Muslim, I don't believe in physics. We're not saying that, but it's that if there's anything in physics that is contradicting what's Islamically, like we have learned in like the miracles of Allah, you're going to follow the miracles of Allah. You're going to say, I'm going to believe those miracles first. And then one day maybe science will prove it, right? So it's really easy. For some reason, I find that like Muslims find that very easy, the scientific explanations without having any proof. But then in this whole concept where it's like, just trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the things he has done for women and the laws for women, that's where people have trouble. And it's like Islam needs to be the lens for you, not the feminism.
And advocating for that.
Exactly.
And going back to your question, because you asked me earlier, how is it impacting our community and our youth, right? I think I mentioned it's impacting our youth. Is because I feel that culturally, and I'm from the Desi culture, Pakistani, but not just the Desi culture, all the cultures that I kind of learn about, it's all the same, is there's a lot of pressure on secular studies, which is great. We need doctors, we need counselors, we need all these different roles filled that women can do. But at the same time, there's not enough emphasis, and maybe there's more emphasis now on Islamic knowledge. And so, like you said, that if people and youth don't have that understanding of Islam, and you're going to go outside in the Western university and learn about feminism and all these, different things, you're not going to understand the clear difference because you never understood what Islam is.
Exactly.
So I think there really needs to be a strong, the podcast name is Happy Strong Family, right? So the root is the family. It's not individual counseling. We need to start focusing on family programs that focus on Islam and really helping people understand their core aqidah, which is submitting to Allah and His laws.
Yeah, that's so
huge issue. Yeah.
That's a really good, I would say, your solution is that, the fact that so many Muslims are turning to feminism is because they don't have the knowledge in Islam. Because if they had the knowledge in Islam, then they would appreciate what Islam offers for women. I think it was something, I don't have the quote for it, so I don't want to say that specifically hadith, but from what I understand, the woman praying at home has a reward similar to that of praying at the masjid. Is that's a concept, and that just learning that was life changing for me. Because I was like, like the responsibilities that a woman is given, right? With that, look at how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just like, this doesn't need to be a reward. It didn't have to be something that's rewarded, but the fact that you want to, of course, come to the masjid and be part of it, and that's so important. We need to build Muslim communities for Muslim women as well, of course. But the fact that if someone does feel like, I want to be at home because of X, Y, Z. And I used to look at my siblings who had kids and I was like, they don't go to the masjid. Like, I would just wonder, like, oh no, like, that's must be hard because I love doing this as like someone who's single and like I was always going. But then it's like you get the same reward. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has women covered. And that's when you really get into it and you realize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is rewarding us and He's giving us what feminism is supposedly supposed to give.
And even I would even elaborate on that point is because even that point, a lot of women use to step away from the da'wah. They say, well, no, my role is in the home, right? And yes, that's true. But again, if your understanding comes from yourself, you're always going to not do what Allah wants from you. Right now, we're in a crisis, right? We're literally in a world crisis where right, left, and center. And I can't just name one thing. There's just so many things that we're struggling with. And so we need the men and we need the women to be able to step up. How do you get that understanding? Well, you get that understanding from Allah. So even, some of the rulings that are out there, like women can pray in the home and they're rewarded. You question some of these because there's other rulings that kind of set precedents, which is like, the woman needs to be able to speak up. She needs to be able to advocate. So my point being is that the rule and what you need to do in life and your guiding principle always needs to be Allah. What Allah wants from you.
Exactly. There's always going to be that balance as well.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate that. Yeah.
For sure.
So we'll take a few questions from the audience now.
Yes, for sure.
Yes, Jazakallah khair. So before we get to the questions, I just want to provide Sister Kulsoom's contact details again. So again, we have her website, which is kulsoomkazim.com. So KulsoomKazim.com. And then also very active on Instagram, posting all sorts of great content. So it's Kulsoom Life Coach is the handle for Instagram. So inshallah, please check her out. And a little bit more administrative details. So next week, inshallah, we will have Dr. Rashid, our fan favorite, back. Mashallah, a few of his clips just crossed 1 million views organic on Instagram, which I think is amazing. Subhanallah. So inshallah, Dr. Rashid will be back in the studio next week. And then if we get to some of the comments that we're getting on the stream, so Jazakallah khair for conducting a podcast on this very important topic. Hope to have more. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you immensely. Dr. Rashid himself was watching. He was like, can we ask the sister to perhaps elaborate on the rights Islam gave our sisters, such as the rights to inheritance? So mashallah, he submitted this question, and without us even prompting you, we already talked about it. So Jazakallah khair. So we got a few more comments from the audience for saying salam. And then if I get to some of the questions that had come in previously, so sorry, my screen is just acting up here.
No problem.
It's a new system this week, so
yeah, that's okay.
So one of the questions that came in was how to protect our children from a feminist mindset when it's becoming mainstream, even in Islamic circles and teachings.
Yeah, so we were just talking about this, right? Like the root needs to start from a very young age. The obedience is to Allah, right? Yes, I know sometimes we get into this power struggle as parents that you need to obey me. And yes, there's obedience to parents and there's obedience to, your spouse. But because Allah asked you to. But when it's disobedience to Allah, then there's no obedience to even mankind, right? So instilling that concept in them from a young age, I think is very, very important. And then right away talking to them about feminism. That look, there's this thing out there and then this is how you're supposed to tackle it and this is how you're supposed to deal with it. Having very open, candid discussions, I think is very important for our youth today.
Yeah.
And so I think starting off with those two principles would be a very good place to start off.
Yeah.
Jazakallah khair. So the next question that had came in is, many Muslims think that Islam is I always struggle with the pronunciation of this
misogynistic.
word. Yeah, misogynistic religion. What can you advise for a Muslim that struggles with this and lets it create doubts about Islam?
So are we saying why it's not a misogynistic religion?
I think
Deen?
many Muslims think that it is a misogynistic religion. And what can you say to Muslims who struggle with the concept that it actually isn't? So that's interesting. I didn't know that people think
so
that. Wow.
It actually goes back to what Sheikh Rashid was asking, right? For me to elaborate on is on the rights of Islam. And I feel like we need another podcast just to talk about all the different ways that Islam honors the woman.
Yeah.
And so there's just so many different ways it honors the woman by, if you're in the Western system, you only get 3 months of maternal leave and then you're done, right? But Islam says that it doesn't force you to work. It doesn't push it upon you. And so right away, Islam is honoring you because it understands that postpartum is so hard. So right away, you understand that, Islam is honoring the woman. And so just like that example, there's so many other examples where you understand that, no, Islam is not just about supporting the man. There's so many, female scholars in the past, even Aisha radiallahu anha, that, used to spread the message of Islam. The rulings are not spread by just men. It's talked about by women, for women, to women. And so, you really have to have a different perspective and have an open mind and really look into the examples that we have before claiming that Islam is a misogynistic religion.
Yeah, I'm shocked that can even be a claim because people, you can maybe say, oh, this person is misogynistic, but when has any religion ever been labeled as misogynistic when its main purpose, if you look at it, any religion, but then Islam, main purpose is to guide people, to support them, to help them. So it's interesting.
Okay, Jazakallah khair. The next question that came in through Instagram. I'm a university student. How to balance advocating for human rights, including women's rights, and allying with good-hearted non-Muslims while maintaining my faith.
Yeah, so there's two things to that. When you, again, see, it's a very slippery slope, which you have to be careful of, especially if you have that, I'm an advocate, I'm an activist kind of personality, which I think is a very good personality to have.
Yeah.
But the first part is that the human rights, right? When you're saying that you're fighting for human rights, what does that mean? Human rights according to who? Because not all rights are according to Islam. So you can't fight for human rights if it contradicts Islam. Okay, so that's right off the bat something you cannot do. And the second thing is now you're saying you're allying with good-hearted non-Muslims. If non-Muslims understand that they're fighting under the guise of Islam for something, for sure you can ally and you can get that support because you're fighting for the same thing. But if their principle isn't even the same, for example, you're fighting for Islam and the rights of women in Islam, but they're fighting for women's rights that are not coming from Islam, you're not on the same page, even if you think you're on the same page. So I would say that, always, again, in university, keep Islam first and be careful about who you're allying with and what human rights you're following, because not all of them are from Islam.
Exactly. And looking to the scholars as well, like what does an ally even mean?
Yeah.
I feel like that's really important because if you're allying with someone, you're saying, yep, I'm on the same page and I agree and I believe, Islamically, if there are certain things that we follow, right, especially like as we were saying, it's not just women's studies, it's not just women's rights, it's women and gendered rights. So you want to be really careful because as an ally, you're saying I also agree with a certain sentiment, but if you don't, then you can't, I think, then you don't call yourself an ally. You're actually working towards maybe like human rights within Islam.
Yeah. And also, there's so many different waves of feminism and there's so many underlying understandings of it that you really have to look deeply into feminism before you start claiming something. You know what I mean? And so when you look into feminism, a lot of the, members and the leaders are actually supporting the LGBTQ community.
Mhm.
And so right away, you're literally supporting something that is clearly going against Islam.
Yeah.
And so you really have to be careful of what you're kind of aligning yourself to from the get-go, for sure.
Yeah.
Jazakallah khair. And the last question for now is, so I think they meant to say I'm a male, like I'm a guy looking for a spouse. Respectable ways to ask a potential on her views regarding feminism versus Islamic gender. They don't take this line of questioning well. So, it's one person's opinion, but it's based on their experience.
Yeah.
But maybe if you have like sort of a general advice.
Yeah. So I chuckle when I read this because the last part is they don't take this line of questioning well. Well, to the brother, that is a red flag right away because it means that you can't have these conversations with people. And for sure, there are women that are very like, what do you mean? Like, why are you questioning my rights? Why are you questioning this? And so right away, that's a red flag to, kind of further your relationship on that understanding. And the second thing was with regards to that question is ask it outrightly. What do you think about feminism? What do you think the roles of women are? See if that woman understands Islam. See, does she have Islamic knowledge? She's going to be the mother of your children. And if you don't understand where she's taking her deen from, well, you're going to raise a generation that it's going to be very scary for you. So have very open, candid discussions. If someone's not having them, then that's a red flag for
exactly.
me, for sure.
Already, if the questioning isn't done well.
Yeah.
I think even like understanding that, asking someone what their thoughts are before like inserting. So I would say like he can't say, oh, by the way, I don't believe in feminism. What are your thoughts? Like instead it's just, so what do you think about the feminist movement? Like very simple question to start off. And if someone doesn't have a good point of view, then what you said is exactly valid.
And educate them, right? Because they may not know. But if they're open to understanding and getting that education, then that's a good sign. So lots of work to do for that, brother, I think.
Yeah.
Sorry, there was one more question that coming in through text. I can't display it on the screen. It was very long message, and I'm not going to read it word for word because it called out specific people in specific situations.
Sure.
But generally, the sentiment of the message was that, a lot of males, because of the feminist movement, perhaps, a lot of males, like, they're being sort of abused in their marriages, in their, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, and there's no one looking out for them. Like all the community members are too afraid to speak up on their behalf. So is this an issue? And if it is, what would you say to like sort of the community here?
Yeah, 100% it's an issue, right? We always use, I think, these terms are so overused: abuse, toxic. What else is there? Can you think of some words that are just so overly used these days? Like you're abusing me, you're mentally abusing me, or you're narcissistic, or you're manipulating me, you're gaslighting.
Oh God, but I know so many of them.
Gaslighting is one of those words. And I think what's happening is that because there's this, feminist movement supporting women, Muslim women are also getting into that. So they, we're not perfect. So you're going to get into arguments with your spouse. But what happens is you always tend to think you're right. And then you use that underlying principle that's fed out there that, women are always right. You're able to think what you want to think. And then you start telling the husband, well, you're gaslighting me. Oh, are you telling me about Islam? That's manipulation. How could you tell me what Allah wants when this is what is actually, the right Islam? And then what's happening is like, the brother was asking, a lot of people are scared of speaking up because you're scared of facing resistance to the feminist movement. Right now, if you speak up, and so definitely coming on a podcast and speaking about feminism is something that you could have a backlash sometimes, right? From the feminist community. But that's okay because you're representing Islam. But not a lot of people are there. They don't want to support, especially if you're in that limelight. They don't want to support you as a man if you're going against a woman that's in the limelight right now. And so I think that the principle needs to be, again, guiding, like Allah guiding you, and Islam needs to be the guiding principles, whether it's going against man, whether it's going against women. You need to speak for the haqq. You need to speak for the right thing. And if our leaders and our religious imams and counselors don't do that, then men and women are not going to have the justice that they need through Islam. So men and women, not just women, but men as well in situations like that.
And a situation like this, it's like, hopefully, I'm hoping for the person who commented, like they find someone who can like understand what they're going to and then mold into that. So it's like, of course, the people that maybe they went to for support
Yeah.
were not, they did not align with this.
Yeah.
They probably did think, oh, we're afraid that the people from the feminist movement, they're going to come up against us, right? I don't know how, what scale this is happening, but maybe finding a support that is going to align with the values of men can also, of course, go through abuse.
But you know, like, you know how we were saying, how has this impacted our community? And I won't take long because I know we have to end, but it's just that underlying right away. If a woman says something that, you know, I was abused by my spouse, automatically you get sympathy. Oh my God, that's so sad. It must have happened. That's how men are. But if a man speaks up and says that, no, you must be wrong, because women can't do that. And this underlying emotion right away of supporting women no matter what, I think is promoted by the feminist movement.
Exactly.
So we need to stop advocating for one party. We need to advocate for Islam, which supports everyone equally in the way that Allah wants it to be. That's what I'm going to end off with.
That was beautifully said. Mashallah.
So I'll ask a question from my behalf.
Sure.
Like I have two boys, no girls, two boys. So, but one of so I've done a lot of reading, and there's a lot of books out there, like The Boy Crisis, The Boys Adrift, how boys are falling behind, right? How, you know, university admissions, corporate jobs, and are all going like the women, and which is a good thing, but it's actually impacting our boys, because they're really falling behind now. There's for example, there's so many programs like STEM for women, this for women, this for girls, coding for girls, but there's not sort of the equivalent one for boys. So as a parent that's sort of raising boys or girls, like, do you see a difference in raising them, and how should we sort of bring our boys up to sort of make sure they're not falling behind? Because obviously we can't control the feminist movement, but we can control what's going on in our houses, right? So,
it's such a heavy question, because what you're asking me is, how do we stand up against a force out there? And that sounds scary when you say it. How do you stand up against this force? It's not standing up against one organization. Feminism isn't an organization. It's a whole force. It's a whole system that's out there. So what do? You know, I don't know if it's going to get better for men. I don't know how that's going to be. All I can say is that as families, as, you know, people who have the platforms, as women, as men, we need to start promoting and advocating for these things. When we have conversations, inshallah, that's how change happens, with that, you know, with that resistance. And so that's all I can say. And I can pray that, you know, as Muslims unite, because unity is key, that we can unite upon these concepts and work for providing opportunities for men and women in the guise of Islam, and really fight that force of feminism. But that's as far as I can go, because it is a force and you have to be united to fight against it, for sure.
No, Jazakallah khair, that helps a lot. So one comment just came in from Dr. Rashid. I'll display it. Lack of understanding of a mother's role and a wife is affecting quality of family life. The priority mismatch is causing disasters, which lack of secular knowledge did not do. So it's just, do you agree with that, or any thoughts on that?
Yeah, you know, and I love how he's just like really adding to what we're saying, mashallah. Is if you don't know your roles as a wife, it's going to show up in your relationship. If you don't know your roles as a Muslim, it's going to show up when you go to work, because you're always wanting equal rights. And so I'm just going to quickly agree with that, because there's not much more I can say with regards to that emphasis. So,
okay, Jazakallah khair. So I think that's it for the questions and comments. So Munta, I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah, for sure. Jazakallah khair, Sister Kulsoom. I really this is probably one of the first times that, after thinking that, you know what, I don't openly follow like the feminist movement, actually talking about it, because, you know, you study and then you kind of move on. But alhamdulillah, this was really great, because I can totally see like us doing a part 2, part 3. So I definitely would love to continue this conversation with you. What you had said last was an amazing takeaway. And would you have one thing for the audience to just think of, what can they do to flourish? What can women and men do to flourish without like feminism? What's one thing?
So I'll comment on that, but I wanted to mention what you said before. It was just like a conversation me and my husband were happening in the car today. So he's helping me kind of like prepare my points for today's podcast. And I was like, you know, why don't you go do the podcast, just as a joke? And he's like, no, I can't do that. I'm a man. And, you know, like, people aren't going to take it the right way. And it was just like a light kind of conversation that we had. And I was like, subhanallah. as a man who's saying the same things that I just said, even more eloquently and better because he's very well spoken, he's scared as a man to speak to women because women are going to backlash. So I would say if we have another conversation like this, I want it to be with a man, with a sheikh, with someone that can speak on feminism. So we also hear their perspective, especially the last question that the brother had about how this is impacting men as well as women. And so to answer your question, how can we flourish? Well, one is you understand Islam from the core. You really understand that Allah is the one that is going to guide you and tell you what to do and how to do it. And be proud of being a Muslim. You know, whatever your role is in Islam as a woman, whatever your role is as a man in Islam, be proud of it, own it, and do those roles. I think if we stick to our roles and the way that we're supposed to be, we can flourish as a society. When we get into competitions and all of these things, that's when we start falling apart. So be proud of being a Muslim in the way that Islam is supposed to be. Yeah.
Beautiful. Jazakallah
So sorry, one thing I'll just add is that you know, you were talking about this conversation and having it with a men present
100%.
We have a volunteer for that, actually, Sheikh Abdullah Misra, who you've been on the panel with before. He wanted to be here for this conversation.
I know, today,
So, you know, it didn't work out this time, but inshallah, I'm going to hold you to that. I'm going to hold him to that. And we're going to set something up where we can have that conversation.
And even as a woman, I felt that, you know, no, we need to first have a woman address this because it might not be taken the right way. But now that I've addressed it, let's do it. Let's have that conversation with a man and a woman. So yes, definitely hold me accountable, inshallah. Inshallah.
Okay,
jazakallah khair for having me.
But thank you so much. Inshallah, see everyone back next week on our Happy Strong Family podcast. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.